This is Third Paradigm, and I'm Teresa Coraggio. Robert Malone's latest pity post is called The Price Paid, Reflections on the Consequences of Whistleblowing and Notoriety. It begins like a bad novella. He notices the subtle furrowing of her forehead, the slight change in how she is holding her eyebrows, and asks, "Are you okay?" She answers, "No, I am depressed and angry. It's not just the constant online attacks, it is also the lack of support from so many that I had thought were friends." What? Friends aren't supporting your attempts to bankrupt and destroy people who've spent their lives defending victims of Big Pharma? That is just so mean of them. Malone describes this as the unspoken truth which daily eats at our souls, and states that he and Jill are the victims. I do not know of a better term, he says, of organized censorship, gaslighting, defamation, online bullying, and cyber stalking. His first examples are not getting credit for being the inventor of mRNA, and then others editing his Wikipedia page and the mRNA Wikia pages to write him out and his scientific contributions, and then giving Carico and Weissman prizes worth millions of dollars, if not the Nobel, for his invention, for which he got a Susan B. Anthony dollar. Spit. But before he had even spoken out about the genetic vaccines that I'm unclear whether he wants the credit or the blame for, he writes, "I had been attacked for trying to advance clinical research into the use of famotidine and celecoxib with or without ivermectin. An elaborate attack article including photographs of myself and our stallion Jade was prepared and published by the AP Press. I can no longer find that article on the web, only this one." And then this one is a July 2020 AP article called "Pepcid as a Virus Remedy. Trump's admin's $21 million gamble fizzled." Like the mRNA vaccines, it's hard to tell whether Malone is complaining about being blamed or not getting credit. The article reads, "There were no published data or studies to suggest that famotidine, the active ingredient in Pepcid, would be effective against the novel coronavirus. And in early April, when government scientists learned of a proposal to spend millions in federal research funding to study Pepcid, they found it laughable. According to interviews, a whistleblower complaint, and internal government records obtained by the Associated Press. But that didn't stop the Trump administration from granting a $21 million emergency contract to researchers trying it out on ailing patients. The FDA gave the clinical trial speedy approval even as a top agency official worried that the proposed daily injections of high doses of famotidine for already sick patients pushed safety to the limits, internal government emails show. That contract is now under scrutiny after a government whistleblower accused a senior administration official of rushing the deal through without the scientific oversight necessary for such a large federal award. And the doctors who initially promoted the Pepcid idea are locked in a battle for credit and sniping over allegations of scientific misconduct. Meantime, the trial itself is on pause due to a shortage of hospitalized COVID-19 patients in New York, delaying it indefinitely. A vaccine or effective treatment could be available before the study is complete. The Pepcid project has underscored what critics describe as the Trump administration's casual disregard for science and anti-corruption rules that are meant to guard against taxpayer dollars going to political cronies or to fund projects that aren't rigorously designed. The evidence used to support the trial is extremely weak, said Dr. Stephen Nyssen, a Cleveland Clinic cardiologist who has been a frequent advisor to the FDA. And I've been very critical of this approach to the COVID-19 epidemic, which I've likened to throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. I consider trials like this one to be largely a waste of time and money when they're very unlikely to show positive results. This video, by the way, has a lot of quotes, and I know that can be hard to follow when you're listening or watching. But if you look at the description of the video, it has a Substack link, and there all of the quotes are spelled out. So in that article, along with being described as a molecular virologist and chief medical officer of Alchem Labs, Malone is called a prolific social media poster who raises a rare breed of Portuguese horses on a farm in Virginia, and also serves as a consultant to a Pentagon-funded program that develops medications to protect American troops from biological threats. Malone said he recognized such a threat in the pathogen tearing through Wuhan. The virus was moving so fast that there did not appear to be enough time to develop a vaccine, the article says. So after Malone's domain system reportedly spits out famotidine, and he tested it on himself, he and Callahan split on who deserves the credit/blame for its discovery. Michael Callahan had evidence/anecdotes that hospitalized Chinese COVID patients taking antacids with famotidine did better than those without. He claimed that was the impetus. And his biodefense buddy was Robert Kadlec, who was Assistant Secretary for Emergency Response at the Health and Human Services, and hired him as an advisor. So when the Trump administration pushed the HHS to test repurposed drugs without specifying which ones, Kadlec contacted a colleague of Callahan's at Northwell Health, which is New York State's largest healthcare provider, to run expedited trials of famotidine and hydroxychloroquine, which at that time was the standard of care given to all patients. The article makes no further mention of the hydroxychloroquine trials, other than saying its emergency use authorization was revoked. The focus on famotidine led to questions of cronyism. The article reads, Rick Bright, BARDA's director at the time, would later file a whistleblower complaint alleging unethical conduct by agency leadership and point to the Pepcid trial as a key example. He says, by directing a member of his staff, Callahan, to work as an agent of both the company and the government regarding the proposal, Dr. Kadlec was inviting violations of federal procurement law, Bright said in his complaint. Two other federal scientists on Bright's team shared his worries that Callahan's involvement appeared to be a conflict of interest. By directing a member of his staff, Callahan, to work as an agent of both the company and the government regarding the proposal, Dr. Kadlec was inviting violations of federal procurement law, Bright said in his complaint. Two other federal scientists on Bright's team shared his worries that Callahan's involvement appeared to be a conflict of interest. Several of them initially saw the Pepcid proposal as a joke. The request was based purely on anecdotal evidence for a trial that would cost millions and take months. Their concerns were ignored, according to Bright's complaint, and government records. Kadlec oversees Bright's agency and wanted the Pepcid contract approved, fast. Soon, Bright was reassigned to a lesser role in the department. So the real whistleblower, in the true sense of someone who exposes corruption by those who hold power over them, was Rick Bright at BARDA. His testimony pointed to Kadlec, Callahan, and Malone in a get-rich-quick scheme to run expensive trials for something that had no small studies or field data to back it up. and rather than taking the director of BARDA seriously, he was demoted. Then Alex Azar, Secretary of Health and Human Services, raised concerns about the lack of data. So Cadlick had Northwell partner with Alchem Labs, where Malone was chief medical officer, to speed the funding proposal up. Then the FDA objected to the large doses, far beyond what had been tested for safety with animals. They were forced to dial it back, and even then the FDA said they were pushing the levels of intravenous famotidine to the limits of toxicity from animal studies. The article continues. With FDA's approval to move forward, Northwell sent Cadlick a preliminary trial budget, a copy of which was obtained by the Associated Press. This initial budget document was a confusing spreadsheet and sought about $250,000, a paltry amount compared to the $20.7 million eventually allotted for the contract. Malone said the initial low estimate was Northwell's mistake, and that the nearly $21 million sum was reached after his team got involved. We stepped in to do it on behalf of Northwell, which knew nothing about federal contractor, Malone told the AP. Obviously. Northwell spokesman Labasi disputed that Malone took control of preparing the contract proposal and said he became very difficult to work with as the plans for trial progressed. By early April, the Pepcid trial was still viewed by some in BARDA's upper ranks as amateurish and not worthy of federal research dollars and resources. Can you believe they want to use Pepcid AC now? Bright quoted his then-deputy, Gary Disbrow, as saying during a phone call between the two. In an email, Disbrow, now BARDA's acting director, called the proposal a Callahan thing. Bright recounted the exchange in the whistleblower complaint he filed in early May with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. The standard way for a pandemic-related research project to get funding is through BARDA, and only after rigorous reviews. The Pepcid project took a different route. The study was vetted through a fast-track program created by Cadlick called Asper Next, which Bright alleges was designed to circumvent BARDA's scientific review. On April 14th, the federal government awarded a $20.7 million contract to Malone's employer, Alchem, and its subcontractor, Northwell, for a trial to assess the safety and effectiveness of the combination of hydroxychloroquine and famotidine for the treatment of moderate to severe COVID-19 disease, according to a brief summary of the award. Malone resigned as Alchem's CMO a week later, citing what he described as a difficult work environment. He has since been critical of Callahan and the project. Meantime, the trial has been paused indefinitely because of a dearth of new patients in New York. So, in between April and July of 2020 in New York, there was a dearth of hospitalized COVID patients. Was that due to the fact that hydroxychloroquine was the standard of care until it somehow got discredited? And how did that happen? There's something I remember about an overload of too much of some safe medication that was given to patients in order to provide an almost lethal dose. Was that hydroxychloroquine? It seems like it could be a similar MO to how famotidine was being used, which may have been something that was beneficial for early at-home treatment, the way that it had been used before by Malone himself and also by perhaps some other COVID patients. When did all this happen? Malone provides that in his litany of press pillories. He writes, The story of the New York-based Northwell Hospital chain involvement in all of this is one that I will tell some other day. And then he links this article from Business Insider, which followed the one that was by Brendan Burrell in Science magazine by one day. So this is April 27th, 2020. This article reads, "The double-blinded trial run by the Feinstein Institute is randomizing patients either to receive famotidine intravenously alongside hydroxychloroquine or hydroxychloroquine alone. They'll be evaluated against a control arm of patients treated earlier in the crisis. Those on the trial are hospitalized and have bilateral pneumonia and low oxygen levels in the blood as a result of the novel coronavirus. The patients undergo treatment for 7 to 10 days based on estimates of how to dose the medication high enough that it might turn the virus off and keep it from replicating. Our first choice was not to have hydroxychloroquine in all patients," Tracy said. However, by the time the trial went underway, the anti-malarial medication had become a standard part of treating hospitalized patients, making it difficult to find patients who weren't on the drug. The researchers are looking into whether another arm can be added to the trial, just evaluating famotidine without hydroxychloroquine. So far, 150 patients have been enrolled into the famotidine and hydroxychloroquine trial, a spokesman for the Feinstein Institute told Business Insider. Then Malone's own CV from July 2021 provides more information about this. Under his experience with Alchem Labs, he writes that he was a consultant for them from 2012 to 2019, but then in November of 2019 through April of 2020, he became a full-time employee as their chief medical officer, so only a critical 6 months. He was the technical lead and writer for full-funded proposal under, and then a number of letters, entitled A Multi-Site Randomized Double-Blind Multi-Arm Historical Control Comparative Trial of the Safety and Efficacy of Hydroxychloroquine and the combination of hydroxychloroquine and famotidine for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized adults." He continues, "Developed and wrote initial clinical trial design for a comparative trial of the safety and efficacy of hydroxychloroquine and the combination of hydroxychloroquine and famotidine for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized adults." So, the funding proposal is essentially a trial of hydroxychloroquine and then that combination. And he was the one who wrote the clinical trial design to see whether hydroxychloroquine was safe and effective. And the results? We only have that one-liner from the July 2020 article that its emergency use would later be revoked by the FDA amid growing evidence the drug failed at treating the disease and could cause serious side effects. Did that growing evidence include the clinical trial that Malone designed? And how could hydroxychloroquine have failed when numerous field studies have shown it to be one of the most effective drugs to treat COVID-19, and it's been used safely around the world for decades? The control group was historical, and they didn't have the first case in New York until February 29th. By April, patients couldn't be treated without hydroxychloroquine, although Malone would have liked to exclude it. By July, the trial has been abandoned for lack of hospitalized COVID patients. That sounds to me like a trajectory of success. How can you compare a dwindling number of hospitalized COVID patients, all treated with hydroxychloroquine, to the first month of a pandemic and not come up with an effective drug, or that it's unsafe. I think that someone should find BAA 18100 SOL quadruple 03 Amendment 15 and look at the dosages. After Alchem, Malone goes back to his own consulting company, the LLC that bears his name. So what did he make for that 6-month stint at Alchem? If the subcontractor Northwell was paid triple their original bid of $250K, they would have walked away with Alchem pocketing $20 million. Did Malone end up getting some percentage of that for bringing in the deal? Or did he end up with another Susan B. Anthony dollar? His leading contracts going back to his consulting included accelerated COVID-19 therapeutic interventions and vaccines as part of active ACTIV Therapeutics Clinical Working Group NIH, invited participant June 2020 to present, and then clinical trials protocol development for famotidine as an oral outpatient treatment. And then buried further down, there's something interesting, which is commercial intelligence work for 2 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world as a subcontractor. So what is commercial intelligence work? And why isn't he naming those 2 large pharmaceutical companies? And for whom is he a subcontractor? That all sounds pretty covert to me. But whether or not he got the money for it, Malone still wanted the credit. The July 2020 AP article continues. About 2 weeks after the Pepcid contract was awarded, Science magazine published an article describing the deal. In the piece, Callahan was credited as the first to call attention to the drug in the U.S. The article mentioned Malone's work briefly, with the lion's share of the credit going to Callahan and Tracy for the trial of a drug that had yet to show any ability to help people infected with coronavirus. In an email to the magazine's editors, Malone challenged Callahan's China story. No one that I am aware of has or had ever seen the data from Wuhan that Michael alludes to, he told the Science editor. He had promised to show me those data, but never did. A senior Science editor responded that the magazine had also been unable to independently confirm Callahan's account, but was not going to run a correction because he considered Callahan's version of the story to be anecdotal. Soon after the Science piece was published, there was a national shortage of Pepcid AC and other antacids containing famotidine, according to the FDA. And Malone went to war with his fellow doctors. In a LinkedIn post, Malone has accused Tracy and another doctor of improperly demanding to be included as authors in a new study about famotidin's possible effectiveness against COVID-19. A senior Northwell official advised Tracy a few weeks later to studiously ignore Malone, and attorneys for Tracy and another doctor have sent Malone cease and desist letters demanding he stop disparaging them. Malone just wants back in the discussion and primary credit for the discovery, such as it is at this stage, the Northwell official's email to Tracy read. Even before Northwell's Pepcid trial was put on hold indefinitely, Pepcid was a long shot as an effective remedy, said Peter Lorre, a former FDA Associate Commissioner and President of the Center for Science in the Public Interest. He continues, but the irregular process by which the contract was granted raises real questions about whether scarce government resources are being committed to the most promising therapeutic candidates. So it's interesting that cease and desist letters had been sent to Malone for his public accusations against other doctors on LinkedIn, an employment networking site. Their lawyers demanded that Malone stop disparaging them for the public recognition they'd been given as the discoverers of a failed drug. And what happened to hydroxychloroquine in all this, and that pesky issue of those lost lives, ruined lives, lockdowns that never would have happened, businesses that wouldn't have been closed, vaccines that never would have gotten emergency use authorization? Malone wants all of the credit, and with it comes the blame. If this was his project to test hydroxychloroquine, he failed humanity and served his shadow masters by enabling it to be blacklisted as ineffective and unsafe. And I'll end by going back to Malone's pity party post. He writes, "What's to be done when a wide range of corporate media, fact-checkers, social media companies, and online haters, who we now know were at least partially supported by the CDC, are doing their best on a daily basis to destroy your reputation and generally write you out of history, or defame, slander, gaslight, and disparage? Not to mention the various small opportunists seeking to elevate their own profile by attacking you. The general non-specific answer is that you pay a lawyer to write and send a cease and desist letter. Sometimes that works, but the devil is in the details. Never any apology forthcoming, though, or anything even close to a recognition that what they were doing is wrong. Rarely are the online or published attack articles taken down. It appears that some entity pays Google to keep the infamously poorly written and researched Atlantic Monthly attack article at the top of the Google ranking when one searches my name. Then, having threatened to sue if the defamation is not rectified, you are left with two choices: tuck your tail and walk away, or follow through. Suffice to say, I am not one to tuck. Yes, an intentional double entendre. Civil lawsuits alleging malicious defamation are among the hardest to prosecute and win, and notoriously expensive. So unless you have the legal budget of someone like President Trump, you have to pick your battles and build a strategy, particularly when facing a barrage of cannon fire. Fortunately, our revenue from Substack allows us some greater freedom to pursue legal action, but it all comes out of our own bank account. No big donor has stepped up and said, "Oh, poor Robert Malone, there, let me help you with your legal costs." And the courts take forever to even decide if they will allow the case to proceed to the discovery level. The infamous Atlantic article that he refers to begins, "Robert Malone, a medical doctor and an infectious disease researcher, recently suggested that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines might actually make COVID-19 infections worse." Is that really defamation? Isn't that his position? And then I need to stop and acknowledge how ugly and toxically macho his double entendre on not being one to tuck is. I think it is vicious and disgusting the way in which there is ridicule that's just accepted as being part of the norm, part of being one of the guys, to ridicule people who are gay, people who are transgender. I think that is being used against us. I think our love for other people, including gay and transgender, is being used against us. But that doesn't mean the answer is not to love. And I really did not need the image of Robert Malone tucking in my head, and even more, I didn't need the image of him letting it all hang out so that he could prove to us that his virility is a sign of his following through on lawsuits against two of the people who are doing the greatest job of standing up to the global agenda. And that's what takes real courage. Personally, I think that could be a sign of being a prick, but not of having one. So, poor Malone. No big donor is stepping up to fund his $25 million attack on the Breggins. What a victim he is that he can't go on the offensive and have someone else foot the bill. Should we go start a GoFundMe to help with his legal cost? Oh no, he already has donors. Tens of thousands of paying donors according to Substack. So if tens means at least 20, at a minimum of $50 per year, that's 50 times 20,000 equals $1 million. $1 million a year people are paying him to give him greater freedom to pursue legal action. I am personally glad that he is picking his battles so that I have no doubt about which side I'm on. And to follow this up, this is my post in defense of the Breggins, but this is the playlist that has all 12 of the videos that I've made so far on Robert Malone, and there will be another one following shortly. If you go to Substack, you'll see a list and links of all of those there. Thank you for watching.